Hello, this is Terrence McNally. Welcome to Free Forum. First of all, I just want to say that we followed up, and when I say we, I mean we the people, followed up on the largest peaceful one-day protest in American history, No Kings 2, 7 million in the streets of America demonstrating their opposition to the authoritarian Trump regime. We followed that this past Tuesday with one of the strongest across-the-board sweeps of an election that I can recall. Congratulations to California for the overwhelming victory of Prop 50, temporarily and democratically redrawing our congressional districts to oppose the gerrymandering of Trump and Republicans in Texas and beyond, but also the governor of Virginia, governor of New Jersey, race after race after race, up and down the ballot, big victories. In the words of Ezra Levin of Indivisible, we are on our way to putting an end in 2026 to Trump's authoritarian rule as we know it. Congratulations to us. It took a lot of hard work, and we did it. This week, I'm going to go away from politics to a conversation I had in 2002 with DEBORAH Tannen, best known for her phenomenal bestseller, You Just Don't Understand, Women and Men in Conversation, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for nearly 4 years, including, get this, 8 months at number 1. In this conversation, we focus on 2 of her later books. First, I Only Say This Because I Love You, talking to your parents, partner, sibs, and kids when you're all adults, on why we have so much trouble communicating within families. I think this could be helpful with Thanksgiving coming up. And second, The Argument Culture, Stopping America's War of Words. Unique among Tannen's books, this one focuses on public discourse in the press, politics, the law, education. Way back in 2002, she was making the point that our society had become overwhelmingly adversarial, with consequences not only in our ability to solve problems, but also in our personal relationships. And we have all been sadly the victims of how that has played out in the 2 decades since. Hello, I'm Terry McNally. Thank you for joining us on Free Forum. Why do we feel like kids again when we visit our parents? Why do grown men and women feel constantly criticized by their parents and vice versa? Why does talk in family so often go in circles, leaving us tied up in knots? In her newest book, I Only Say This Because I Love You, just out in paperback, DEBORAH Tannen, the linguist and best-selling author of You Just Don't Understand, reveals why talking to family members is so often painful and messy, even when we're all adults. And in a previous book that we're going to talk some about, The Argument Culture, she explored why America seems to make everything a battle, a debate, or a war, and what that costs us as a society. Here on Free Forum, we explore the lives and the work and the ideas of individuals that I suspect hold pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at new, innovative, and provocative models in business, environment, health, science, politics, media. It's all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. DEBORAH Tannen is best known as the author of You Just Don't Understand, Women and Men in Conversation, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for nearly 4 years, and something I read as I was preparing for this, 8 months at number 1, which is phenomenal, and it really made me think about how hungry people are for understanding. It was this book that brought gender differences in communication style to the forefront of public awareness. Another book, Talking from 9 to 5, Women and Men in the Workplace, Language, Sex, and Power, was also a New York Times business bestseller, and it does for the workplace what the earlier book did for women and men talking at home. Tannen is only one of 3 professors at Georgetown who have been appointed to the distinguished rank of university professor. And in addition to her linguistic research and her writing, she's published poetry, short stories, plays, and personal essays. DEBORAH Tannen, it's my pleasure to welcome you today to Free Forum.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Okay. My first question, as it always is on Free Forum, is about your personal path to the work that you do today and the ideas and the questions that you're focused on. And I invite you to go back as far as you want. Childhood dreams, models, mentors, turning points. I want listeners to know the people that we're talking with as well as their ideas and their projects and so on. And weave it in whatever depth you wish, and I'll keep track of time.
Thank you for asking. This is a great privilege to talk about this. I was one of those returning women, so I didn't really find my path until I was 30. My first marriage, I separated from my first husband. We didn't divorce for several years, and had the opportunity to just decide what I wanted to do with my life. So that's the turning point that I'll be explaining how I got to. I've always loved words. I've always loved writing, and I've always been interested in the secrets and ins and outs of people and their relationships to each other. I think I got my love of language and of words from my father. He was born in Poland. He came to the United States when he was only 12. He's almost 94, still alive. So this was back in 1921 that he came from Poland. He never had the opportunity to become formally educated because his father had died when he was only 3, and he was responsible for supporting his mother and sister. So at the age of 14, he left high school, really never went to high school, worked during the day, and went to school at night. So he's self-educated. As a kind of a PS here, he did manage to not only get a high school equivalency, but also attend law school at night and get a master's degree in law.
Oh, my God.
He's quite amazing.
Yeah.
But I think it was from him that I got the love of language, the habit. When guests had been over and they left, to go back and say, remember when this person said this? They were probably thinking that, or, I saw his, the way, the phrase that he used, or the tone of voice that he used, and this means that, and this means something else. I really got that from my father, as well as the love of language.
And this was in his second language, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He is quite amazing, and again, especially with language. Although he is 94 and hasn't really used Polish since he was 12, he's still fluent in it, and is still intrigued. He'll say, just the other day on the phone, he said, the other day I couldn't remember the Polish word for pin, and it really bothered me. I know I haven't used the word in 80 years, but I just wanted to know that word, and it came to me.
Oh.
And then he told me the word, and it was something like, it had 2 syllables, and something like shepka. And I said, oh, that's a long word for a little thing.
Yeah.
Which most people would probably think is ridiculous. But he said, oh, you're right, but then sometimes you have a little word for a big thing. So that kind of playing with language.
And the thing that you were saying, the nuances of what someone said and what they meant,
Right.
If I could sort of be so bold, it doesn't seem that was as much in people's consciousness a generation ago or 2 generations ago. It does seem fairly unique.
I think that there are some people who are simply disposed that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we linguists, and my PhD is in linguistics, talk about how when a linguist goes to do field work with a particular language, maybe an uncommonly spoken one or an American Indian language or a native language somewhere, they look for informants, and they will find one person in the culture, in the village, in the community, who happens to just have this orientation. Language fascinates them, and they love to sit with the linguist and discuss the various connotations of different words. This word means this if you say it this way, or that if you say it that way. So I do think it's kind of a predilection that some people have, probably akin to the love of language that makes people become writers, whether or not they were raised in a highly literate culture.
Sure.
So I think that's where I trace my love of language and the fact that I always wrote. Even when I was a little kid, my favorite possession in the house was our old typewriter. I used to spend hours writing letters.
As a little girl?
As a little girl, yeah, 6, 7, 8. I'd write letters. I'd write journal notes. So that's one piece of it. Now, how did I get into this idea of using this to become a linguist and to analyze how people use language in their everyday lives?
Hold that question for 1 second and let me let listeners know that you're listening to Free Forum. I'm your host, Terry McNally, and we're speaking with DEBORAH TANNEN, the linguist, the best-selling author of You Just Don't Understand, The Argument Culture, and just out in paperback, I Only Say This Because I Love You. And right now, DEBORAH is sharing with us her
personal evolution and how she became the person that we're interviewing. So, yes,
Okay.
one thing I was going to ask was that when you said you sort of made you were a second chance kind of after your first marriage and so on, had you even been an academic prior to that?
I did have a master's degree. A little brief summary. I got my bachelor's with a major in English, and then, very much a child of the 60s, went off to just travel. I saved enough money to be able to travel when you could travel on $5 a day or less, and I ended up in Greece, and there I spoke, I learned Greek, and I spent a year and a half teaching English in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really big influence there. The first man that I married was from Greece. He was somebody that I met when I was in Greece. So we came back to the United States, and we both got master's degrees, he in advertising and I in English, because I just really wasn't thinking of a career so much as the fact that I loved reading, and so English was the topic. With that master's degree, I taught remedial writing and English as a second language in the City University of New York SEEK program. That was a program that started in the early 70s for kids that otherwise would not have been able to go to college. This was the era of open admissions in New York. So there I was in the early 70s teaching at the college level, but teaching writing, introduction to literature, English as a second language. And it was then, in 1973, that my husband decided to go back to Greece, and I decided I did not want to go back to Greece with him. And it was kind of a very easy way, perhaps, to end a marriage that I think probably would have ended anyway, but this way it was not rancorous, and it was not, I didn't have to say, I'm leaving. I just said, I'm not going with you.
Yeah.
That was a lot easier. So he went back to Greece. I taught for one more year, and I went to a summer linguistic institute that had been kind of interesting me for a number of years, but was not really something I could do when I was married, that is, go away for the summer. But now I was free, and the first thing I did was go to the University of Michigan to find out what linguistics was all about. I liked the sound of the word. I didn't really know what it was. I knew it had to do with language, and I thought it sounded kind of neat, and it was just a summer. So I went to the University of Michigan, and it was there that I fell in love with the field of linguistics as a fairly technical, fairly rigorous way to understand the workings of language in everyday life. So I was taking the kind of close analysis that I love to do in literature, but applying it to everyday conversation. I guess at that point I considered, when I decided that I would go ahead and get a PhD, I really considered a PhD in literature, which would have been the natural progression. I considered becoming a lawyer, but that to me meant I would have to get on the subway and work from 9 to 5, or little did I know, probably 6 to midnight, the way lawyers are working now.
Yes.
Or linguistics. And I decided on linguistics because I really wanted to take this technical methodology theory and really look at everyday conversation, which just always fascinated me, probably coming from the part of me that was still a writer. You know, I just love to listen to the exact words that people chose and think about how that affected the outcome of
their dialogue choices that we make spontaneously and a writer makes so carefully.
And I think it's kind of what poetry is all about, just hearing the precise choice of words and the meanings that come out of that.
Yes, the one poetry course I took, the thing that has stuck with me ever since, and I write occasionally, was he said, if there is a target, then poetry aims to write within the bullseye. You know, everything else is fine, but your job there is to be that precise that you're...
And I think of poetry as simply capturing the rhythms of talk, whereas expository prose, that's another thing entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But poetry really captures the rhythms of talk.
So you make this choice to get a PhD in linguistics.
Right. And I was very lucky that summer that I went to the Linguistic Institute at the University of Michigan, they were not focusing on the very technical sides of linguistics that actually do dominate the field, but rather it was language and context. And that was I just have to thank the fates that look out for people for arranging that.
So that just happened to be the focus that summer?
It happened to be the first summer that had been the focus, and the next time was 12 years later when I ran one myself in Georgetown. So that was really just fate looking out for me. And the people that I most enjoyed studying with had come from the University of California, Berkeley. Robin Lakoff, who was a professor at Berkeley, taught a course, language and context, that really caught my fancy. And she was the first person to write about gender and language in a book called Language and Woman's Place. And you'll hear her probably commenting on the radio too.
And her husband is also.
Yes, George Lakoff was there too, although she was the one I studied with.
I have books by her I haven't read, and books by him I have read, and it's just a fluke.
Yeah, well, they both do great work.
Yeah.
And so I realized that if I wanted to study that aspect of linguistics, I had to go to the University of California, Berkeley, and that's what I did. It was a very tough decision. My father, who, as you can tell, I revere, was absolutely against it. Having been a product of the Depression, to him, the prospect of giving up a secure job and just striking out to study was just absurd. Obviously, I should do what he did, keep my job, study at night.
Yeah.
But things had changed, and I don't think we had the same kind of sense of insecurity, and especially in the 60s. We were so complacent that jobs would be there when we wanted. That I just took the plunge and went ahead to Berkeley. And then again, the fates doing their job for me. When I got my PhD, the Georgetown position was available, and it was the perfect position for me because Georgetown has a large program in sociolinguistics, which is the field of linguistics that looks at language and social interaction. And so the job was available. I got it, and I've been here ever since.
That's right. And when I looked back at your bio and so on, I saw that there was a big chunk there of years where you were writing I don't know how to say it, the academic monographs and so on. And how did the transition happen from that to your first popular book and then your second popular book being so popular?
Yes, of course. I forgot that's a pretty peculiar thing to do. So,
I was going to ask actually how peculiar it is. It's really quite rare, isn't it?
It's very rare. Yeah, very rare. For an academic to write for a general audience is rare in itself, but when they do, it tends to be someone who either wasn't interested in a really hard-nosed academic career or failed at it. Didn't get tenure, so they're out there with nothing to do and they write a book. I didn't plan my career, and I think this is a privilege that women have or used to have. So when I was in graduate school, I wasn't thinking of an academic career, but when I got my PhD, I had already published because I liked publishing, and I went and gave papers because I liked doing it, and discovered that this put me in a good position to get an academic job, so I took one. When I came to Georgetown, I really continued on that path, writing academic papers, books. I love to write, and really liking to write is a tremendous advantage in academia. Many people have wonderful ideas, but they just don't get them published, and so we don't know about them.
But to some extent, you were a writer first.
You're right, and because I loved writing, I was publishing like crazy, which I think many people interpret as being a real go-getter in terms of your career, and perhaps that was there in an underlying sort of way, but my focus was it was easy and I liked doing it, so that's what I did. Now, if someone called me up and said, contribute a paper to this journal, sure, I had something to say. So I ended up with a very long resume of published articles and books and papers involved, giving papers at conferences, and it was my life. I was single, and that's where all my attention was going. I didn't meet my second husband, my husband for life, until I was 40, so that meant between 30 and 40, I basically did nothing but this academic work.
All right, much to the consternation of your mother, as you point out.
Yes, which I write about in this book. That's true. So I think all along I had the idea that I would write about it in a way that non-academics could understand. And I never thought of it as instead of. I always thought of it as in addition to.
Can I ask you a question? Since,
Sure.
of course, I haven't looked back at any of the monographs. Was your academic writing, what's the word?
Turgid?
No, I was gonna make the opposite point. Was it a little more easily readable and more accessible than other academic writing? Was your academic writing,
Yes, that's a very perceptive question. Yes. I always wrote my academic writing in a way that was very accessible. In fact, I once actually had an article rejected because it was too readable.
I was going to say that. I was going to say, and how did they feel about that?
Once. Mostly people appreciated it. And I often got letters saying they appreciated that. But even so, my father could read my academic papers. My mother really couldn't. My mother also did not graduate from high school. And I kind of wanted to write something my mother could read, and I knew that everybody was interested. I'd just go to some kind of a party, and I'd always end up with a little group around me.
Sure.
When I talked about these phenomena, like, it was the early days of the women's movement, and I remember sitting in a party when I was still a graduate student with a little group of women around me saying, "You're right, what really upsets us with men is they don't listen to us when we talk. We talk about a problem, and they offer a solution." Actually, that's one I came up with later. We feel like they interrupt us, all these aspects of talk. And I would say, well, it could just be this difference in conversational style.
Right, it might not be that they're evil.
Right.
Let me tell people that you're listening to Free Forum. I'm Terry McNally, and having a wonderful conversation with Deborah Tannen, the linguist and best-selling author of You Just Don't Understand. And a couple of other books we're going to talk about today are The Argument Culture, and then the one that's just out in paperback, I Only Say This Because I Love You. And Deborah is just sort of making the transition to about to write for us.
So to just quickly say how this transformation occurred, even while in graduate school, I had the idea of writing for a general audience in addition. And I recall selling an article to Glamour magazine while still a grad student.
That's heresy, isn't it?
Well, I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't think it was going to really be here or there. They bought the article but never published it, which was a good start. I mean, that's very typical in
Right.
the publishing world. And then I went to Berkeley. My dissertation, off to Georgetown. My dissertation was about New York Jewish conversational style, and how in a Thanksgiving dinner conversation in which I had participated, and by the way, two of the participants are now residents of Los Angeles, so a little local color here. There were 6 friends. 3 of us were New York Jewish, 2 were living in Los Angeles and from California, and 1 was British of Jewish background, but she had grown up in London with a Jewish father. So I had started out that study thinking I'm just going to analyze every individual's conversational style, but I quickly noticed that it was the New York Jewish speakers who had, quote, dominated. And I was interested in how that happened since I knew I had not intended to dominate. And I was able to, and I'm talking about a very technical study here of timing the pauses and spending 2.5 months transcribing a 2-hour conversation.
Now, let me just get this straight. So you were having a Thanksgiving weekend dinner conversation, and you said up front, I'm going to tape this, and I'm going to analyze it?
And now my friends were used to this because I was taping everything at that time. Both my friends and family knew that if Deborah's there, she's probably taping, and they were very indulgent about that, much to my relief.
But also it means that this wasn't a unique thing, so they weren't faking it. They weren't, they didn't, you were saying because it was so common that Deborah would do this, it wasn't like they changed for that instance.
No, there's always the issue of whether taping something is going to have an effect on what people say, and of course it might. But when it's friends who talk to each other anyway, and the tape recorder's on for a long time, the interaction tends to take over and override anything that they might actually, change.
So
and the kind of thing that I'm looking at, like how long a pause you wait between turns or turns of phrase, is not the sort of thing people are conscious of. They're
they couldn't alter it anyway.
They're more likely to not mention topics that they think might be secret. Yeah. Okay, so here I am back at Georgetown, back east, and I'd written my dissertation on New York conversational style, such things as interruption, that the New Yorkers might seem to interrupt, but really they just are expecting a shorter pause. And so they think the other person is done, and they're kind of saving the conversation. Or the people who think they're interrupted and don't realize that they've already given the impression they have nothing to say to the person who expects a shorter pause. So that's just a short example of how I was using conversational style as a way of explaining negative outcomes and negative stereotypes, you know, the pushy New Yorker or the overly shy Californian or the person who doesn't tell you anything. So I started by sending my a copy of my an academic article I'd written based on my dissertation. I sent it to New York Magazine, The New Yorker, and the New York Review of Books. And New York Magazine took it. They published it. Based on that, I got a letter from an editor, Amy Gross, at Vogue Magazine, asking if I could do it for women and men. Which I did. That was my second publication. And based on those articles, I then started looking for an agent and wrote a book for a general audience. And that was the book called That's Not What I Meant. Having written these two magazine pieces, it was a lot easier to convince the publisher that I could actually write for a general audience.
Sure.
And the book, That's Not What I Meant, did nicely, and I had a little one-week book tour, which I, got a great kick out of. Never thinking that this was going to take over my life, just thinking I'll do this in addition. And then I went out and wrote my next book for an academic audience. It's called Talking Voices. It was published by Cambridge in 1989, about how everyday conversation is really made of all the same linguistic features that we think of as being poetic, like repetition of sounds and use of details and dialogue in reported speech. So you can see the confluence of my interest in literary language and other kinds of
And
language.
what's that one called?
It's called Talking Voices. And it's kind of a theory of everyday the poetics.
The poetry of everyday conversation.
Of everyday conversation. And during all this time, I signed another contract to write a book about women and men. And again, it kind of grew out of the book That's Not What I Meant, which had one chapter on gender, and kind of thought that's the one that got so much attention. It seemed like the obvious next topic.
Let me ask a quick question here.
Sure.
Not having read That's Not What I Meant, I'm guessing that it laid out the kind of the foundation of conversational styles for the layman, and then these other books end up being applications.
Well, they're all applications, but the book That's Not What I Meant is the general. What's conversational style? The subtitle really tells it. How conversational style can make or break your relations with others.
Sure.
So it's, and it's just like the others in that we have lots of lively examples and real dialogues, and but it was the general conversational style. How does it affect us?
Right, and then one is men and women, and one is work, and one is family, and.
Actually, it's more...
I'm saying afterwards. I'm saying the other books.
I see, right. Exactly.
That it's the foundation, and then the others are applications in different...
Exactly. Yeah.
And so then you just don't understand.
Well, I guess I would say that's not what I meant as application, but it's more general.
Sure.
From all over. The examples come from all over
the
place. And then came You Just Don't Understand. And when I wrote it, again, I thought, well, maybe I'll do one book for a general audience and then one for academic and go back and forth that way. And at that point, I'd already published enough to be full professor, and I was still thinking of myself as primarily an academic. And then came You Just Don't Understand. I talk about my life pre You Just Don't Understand and post You Just Don't Understand. The book really kind of was a big surprise bestseller. It was not expected to be. The tour was not major. There was no advertising. Very few places reviewed it. But word of mouth seemed to take over. The newspaper journalists really picked it up.
Well, I'm just looking at the copy I have, which was bought when it first came out, and I look at the blurbs on the back. And one of them is Oliver Sacks, and the other is Rome Hare, Oxford University. Now, anyone who was intending a book to be a bestseller would not have that second person's blurb there.
Exactly. Well, I was desperate. I got a blurb from Oliver Sacks because we had corresponded somewhat, because I had a grad student who was deaf, and he was interested in the deaf. So we corresponded a little bit. And he was nice enough to give me that blurb, but I didn't have any of it. So my colleague Ram Hare from Oxford was a natural, and he did that. I actually had others by academics too, but they're no longer being used.
Right.
So the book was published in June, and it hit the bestseller list in August. That's very unusual. Usually books are aimed to be bestsellers, and they, come out of the gates in that way, and if they don't, they're dead 3 weeks
Right.
later.
More like movies. If it opens big, that's what you're hoping for.
Right. And this was a big surprise to everybody. They sold the paperback rights. The day it turned up on the bestseller list as number 11, because they figured that's it, it's going off tomorrow. The book was totally out of stock the entire month of August because the publisher did not believe it was really the phenomenon it seemed to be. They were afraid of getting stuck with unsold books. And then finally, and they kept saying, stay out there on the road because it's sure to fall off the list in July, and then it's sure to fall off in August, and then it's sure to fall off in September when all the blockbusters come out, and then it's sure to fall off by Christmas, and then it just stayed up there for nearly 4 years.
And that statistic, which I said, 8 months at number 1.
In paperback,
That's amazing. I mean, just crazy.
And so that's it. And then
especially
I found myself
it's a book you have to read, When a book like Who Stole My Cheese stays up there, it's a book that's, very short and easy. But this is a book that, even though it's about things people care about, you do have to read it. I mean, it is a real book. Let me tell people, we're at the halfway point. You're listening to Free Forum. I'm Terry McNally speaking with Deborah Tannen, the Georgetown linguist and best-selling author of, most prominently, You Just Don't Understand, but also The Argument Culture, and one that's just out in paperback, I Only Say This Because I Love You. And as she said, her life is life before You Just Don't Understand and life after, and so we hit it right at the halfway point. So
just real quickly, because I know we want to get over to talking about the books themselves. It seems like I had great hopes for That's Not What I Meant, that people would really realize the power of language in their lives. But I think it remained for the topic of women and men, for it to be something that people were so dogged by, so concerned with, that to read the linguistic explanation seemed like a lifeline.
Yes, to find something that would help in what seemed like just really a difficult situation between us.
Right, and it's just been such a gift to me and source of satisfaction that I so frequently run into people that tell me the book saved my marriage, the book helped me so much. Over and over I hear that, and I just feel so privileged to have been able to help people in that way.
Yeah. I'm sure. I mean, and I'm sure it's one that just continues to sell for that very reason. I mean, we haven't gotten any better at this.
And just as a transition here, I'm hearing similar things about the latest book. I Only Say This Because I Love You. In fact, it is probably the most like You Just Don't Understand of the books I've written since.
I believe that in the way that the pain or the costs of being blind about these things is really an important part of people's lives. And so when you can shed a little light on it, I know I had a long conversation just recently with someone who a parent had died, and what was happening to the children now in the way they were relating that they hadn't before, and so on. And I just said, you might, it's a very hot moment, but this book may help. And I'm sure that's what happens a lot. Is people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you're right, because talking from 9 to 5 moved into the workplace. Very important in our lives, but not as personal and intimate, and then the argument culture, which is public discourse. So this one gets back to these very close relationships that really often determine our day-to-day happiness.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about this one, and then we'll talk some more about the argument culture. What is it about families? What is it about that? And one thing that occurred to me was, are some of the same things, and I'm sure you've looked at this one, is some of the same things true of longtime friends, or is there something in the family that trumps even that?
Well, yes, in a way it is also long-term friends. It's the very closeness of the relationship and the history of the relationship that makes all the words carry these extra layers of meaning. And because words have more than one meaning, and we want so much from these family relationships, we so badly want the approval of our parents or siblings. Parents want so much the respect, perhaps, of their adult children, that and still want to help their children and feel close to them, that the same words can have these different meanings. And maybe the best thing is to start with examples. The couple who goes to a restaurant and the man says, "I'll have the steak," and the woman who says, "Oh, did you notice, dear, they also have salmon? You like salmon." And suddenly they're in an argument. And that's what's so hurtful, that we end up in argument over little things, more likely with people we're close to than with people we don't know. And yet it's with people we're close to that finding ourselves in an argument is so distressing. So he hears the criticism. You're not happy with what I chose, and furthermore you think either I'm too fat or I eat too much red meat, or in general too much is what it was in this case. And she feels falsely accused. I didn't criticize. I just made a suggestion.
Yeah, and I
both
think you
are
said,
right.
even if it was more than a suggestion, it was because I love you.
Right. So then the term I introduce is meta messages. It's
Right.
not the meaning of the words, the message, but the implication of the words. What do you think it says about the relationship that you say these words in this way? So the meta message he hears is criticizing. The meta message she is aware of is caring.
Yeah.
You yourself said you want to eat less cholesterol, less red meat, and I want to keep you around. I love you. And we can go over, and I do in the book, of all these examples of arguments where you can just see that the same words can be interpreted both ways, and we end up in fights where one sees only one level, the caring, and the other sees only one level, the criticizing. Or that balancing act between being close, connection, and control, so that we want to feel close, but we don't want to feel we're being controlled. So one person says, "I'll take a walk. I'm going to go for a walk now," and the other says, "Oh, I'll go with you, but could you just wait about 10 minutes? I have to make one phone call first." Now, this might be just fine, but sometimes you end up with an argument. You're controlling me. I can't even go for a walk when I want, and why are you afraid of intimacy? Why don't you love me as much as I love you? I wouldn't mind waiting 10 minutes. And again, it's both. It is connection and it is control. Apologies, I'll give the third example of this same thing having these different meanings. But apologies, it can be between same-sex siblings. It often is, but it often is male-female, where a woman wants the apology, the man doesn't want to give it. He forgot to mail her letter, and he said, "I forgot to mail your letter," but he doesn't say, "and I'm sorry." And she's waiting for that, and finally they're arguing about the apology instead of the letter. She feels it's caring. If you won't apologize, it seems you don't care that you let me down. He feels it's a kind of degradation ritual. Again, falsely accused. Yes, I made a mistake. Maybe I committed a misdemeanor, but you're trying me for a felony here. I'm not going to plead guilty to a terrible offense when I made such a little one. And it really does, and I trace it back to the socialization of girls and boys, which, again, and you just didn't understand, I do, trace these conversational rituals back to when we're kids, where a boy demanding an apology from another boy often is trying to solidify his dominance. Maybe he caught you in a weak spot, and now he's going to rub your nose in it, so in the future you won't, he'll be dominant over you. But the girls don't do it that way. You hear girls saying, I'm sorry, all the time. They may mean it, they may not. It may just be a ritual. It's a way you tip your hat almost. And so it is no big deal to her, and it is a big deal to him.
Yeah.
So the different meta-messages of apologies, caring or admission of fault, which really weakens your position.
Mm-hmm. Or it seems almost, yes, as a ritual demonstration of status and all of those sorts of things, right?
Because that is a theme through. You just don't understand that often women are focusing on the connection level. Does this bring us closer, push us further apart? And the men are focusing on the status or hierarchy level. Is this putting me in a one-down position?
Mm-hmm.
And often the same ways of speaking do both, which is what makes mother-daughter communication so difficult. The mother who's always giving suggestions to her adult daughter about her hair, her weight, her clothing, how she raises her children. From her point of view, this is connection. I'm trying to help, and we're so close, we can talk about anything. And from the daughter, it's a put-down. You don't think that I'm capable of doing these things myself.
Right.
You never did approve of me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, right. A suggestion can be a positive gift is the intention of the giver, and it obviously it can be for the receiver, you perceive a lack.
Well,
you think I'm missing something, I'm at fault somehow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any offer of suggestion, help, or advice is an implied criticism, because if you weren't doing something wrong, you wouldn't need the suggestion or the advice. Now, we need to take corrections and criticism, but we're always balancing how we say it, who we say it to, in what context. And with a mother, it hurts more. I mean, I have a lot of examples, and I only say this for my own family.
Sure.
My mother, who's always obsessed with my hair for some reason, with one of my sisters, it's her clothes. But she always would, whenever I see her, she'll say, "Do you like your hair that long?" Or, "I think your hair needs a trim." She would never go up to a stranger in the street and say, "Excuse me, miss, your hair needs a trim." It is a sign of closeness. But because of the repeated nature of it, perhaps, or because I am super sensitive to criticism from my mother, it grates. Although I must add, now that my mother is 91 and not in the best health, it takes an awful lot to hurt my feelings.
Yeah, she got a lot of slack.
I'm so glad she's still around.
Yes. One of the thoughts I had is that one of the things I would imagine goes on in families is that our relationships start in one place and then have to adapt, and some of the stuff gets locked in the first place. I'm thinking of siblings. If one is 2 years older, as I am, than my younger brother, there was a period of X number, maybe 12 years, maybe 14 years, where I was clearly older, knew more, had advice to give, had power. And now at 54 and 52, and probably ever since 30, that's been gone, but there's something in us that's the same. And obviously with mothers and children, parents and children, it's the same. That the relationship has changed, and yet the earliest ways, what the communications meant, the earliest meta-messages may still be there.
That's absolutely right. And perhaps it's particularly American for us to think that we ought to reach a place where we're all adults and we're all equal, and the sibling hierarchy should no longer count. Many cultures of the world, and China and Japan come to mind, you never forget who was the older sibling and who was the younger one. In fact, in China, you don't address your older sibling by name. You address them by their position. Older sister, second older brother, fourth older brother, whatever it is. And I love to quote Bessie Delaney, who said, "My sister Sadie doesn't approve of me sometimes. She looks at me in that big sister sort of way." And when she said that, she was 101 and her sister was 103.
Yes.
So they are always there. And that's what it is about family. We bring meanings, not just from the current conversation, but from our entire history of communication, every conversation we've had in the past. And that's the good and the bad of family. The good is there's so much understanding there that we don't have to verbalize. The bad is we can often be hurt and read in and way overreact because of that history.
That's right. There's so much charge, and charge, of course, is what makes it juicy and makes it meaningful, and charge is what makes it volatile.
Right. It's why it matters more. If no matter how many people tell me that they love my books, when my father or my mother tells me they love my books, then that means more than all those people put together. But by the same token, if they were to tell me they didn't, it would have all that more power.
Right. Let me ask two quick questions about that. But first, let me tell people you're listening to Free Forum. I'm Terry McNally, speaking with Deborah Tannen, the best-selling author of several books, including You Just Don't Understand, that phenomenon about male-female communication styles. And the book we're talking about right now is recently out in paperback, I Only Say This Because I Love You, which is about parents, siblings, partners, all of us communicating as adults. This question, and it applies in some ways to all of your books. If I read You Just Don't Understand and I learn some of why things make me feel the way they do and why things bring up certain reactions, what do I do then? What does reading how do I use the book to help me?
It's quite amazing that just understanding makes it easy for people to find solutions. And I should say that I do have a little more specific offering of solutions in the new book. I only say this because the editor demanded it, frankly. But people do tell me that just understanding solves the problem, and I'll give you a few very quick examples. Couples who are constantly arguing because she comes home from work and wants to talk about everything that happened and then asks him how his day was, and he says, fine. Or she talks about a problem at work and he offers the solution, and she's annoyed because it means you're not listening and it means you're not giving me what I want, which is just that you understand you've had the same experience. You're trying to fix it. It's not what I'm looking for. It makes no sense to him to just listen. So I could give a tip, tell the man not to give you advice, just to listen. It's going to drive him crazy to listen while you go on and on. He doesn't know why. But if you understand why she's going on, that you understand how talk works among women, that for many women talk is the glue that holds a relationship together, that talking about people at work is not gossip, this evil thing, but it's all just part of feeling like you're part of a community. Suddenly he begins listening because he understands why he's being told. He may even start talking, and many men say that they do, but he may not, and then she won't take it as a personal rejection because she understands why he isn't, that it doesn't have that same function for him. Why it makes sense when he says, let's just sit together and read. Why don't you sit next to me and watch this TV show? For him, we're together, so that creates the bond. For her, we need to talk to create the bond. And I could go that way through every example that I give in the book and give you an example of someone who told me just understanding what's going on allows them to solve the problem.
Now, does it matter?
Sorry?
Does it matter that they both understand?
It certainly is best if they both understand. But if it's only one, you can do something there, too. For example, the apologies, and I've had women tell me, one woman, I can picture her. She was probably 65 years old. She said, I have been frustrated by my husband's refusal to apologize for our 40 years of marriage. Now I understand why he doesn't want to apologize. I'm just going to let it go and listen for more indirect ways that he lets me know he's sorry. And after all, I think that makes just as much sense as our demanding that he say he's sorry. Maybe we can become attuned to other ways that he indicates he's sorry. Just like I say to many men who say, I want my wife to tell me what she means directly. None of this indirectness. I give an example of a woman who might look out the window and comment on how high the snow is, and then later say to her son, why didn't you shovel the snow like I asked you? And he says, you didn't ask me to. And I had a journalist say to me, my wife says things like that, and I know what she means, but I won't do it because she didn't ask me in the right way. And I realized, isn't that the same thing I was doing, wanting my husband to apologize in the right way? So if I say he should become attuned that calling attention to the snow means he should think about shoveling it.
Right. And the thing I hear in what you said is that he said, I knew that's what she meant, but she didn't say it.
in this case,
Yeah,
and
I don't think
know
that's
how
always
typical this is, but in this case, he said, I knew that's what she meant, but I felt like she didn't ask me in the right way. Well, I think that is quite parallel to many of us who know somebody's sorry, but we want to hear them say it.
Right. And one of the expressions you used when I heard you speak at the library was crying literal meaning.
Yes.
And I will confess, I mean, I don't know that it'll make any difference for the millions of times that I've done it, but I in the heat of someone calling me on something, I'm very likely to say, but you didn't say that, and I didn't say that.
As my mentor, Robin Lakoff, pointed out years and years ago, that's the reason many of us choose indirectness. It gives us that out. Now, crying literal meaning, that's my own term, and I'm glad you appreciate it because I do have fun with words, making up these names.
Yes.
But, yeah, it gives us a chance to deny responsibility for what we said. Like the wife who said, I didn't criticize. I just pointed out he might like salmon.
Right.
But when I asked her, supposing he'd said, I'm going to have salmon, would you have said, did you notice here they have steak?
Yeah, right.
She admitted she wouldn't.
Exactly. Okay, let's move to the argument culture.
Yes.
Okay, and this has been very fascinating. How did the others, as we said, built on the foundation of that's not what I meant, applied in different arenas of our lives, are all basically interpersonal communication. This one deals with the culture at large. How did that happen?
I wrote the argument culture largely in response to my experience being out there in the public eye, in the public arena, following You Just Didn't Understand and talking from 9 to 5. Here I wrote books about communication between women and men in the spirit of if we understand each other, we can get along better. And I frequently saw myself put in this framework of the gender wars, the battle of the sexes. The worst example was a California TV show called People Are Talking, where they actually brought in a professional provocateur to scream at me. And he actually said it before we went on the air. He said, I read your book, I think it's really great, but when I get out there, I'm going to attack you. Don't take it personally. That's what they invite me on for. That's what I'm going to do. Now, I don't want to say that was typical. It wasn't. But it crystallized what does often happen in the public arena. And in that book, I look not only at the press, but also our legal system and our political system. And I try to look back at the history of Western culture and contrast our attitude toward opposition, where we really think pitting two sides against each other is the best way to get at the truth, with other cultures which really don't put this positive value on open conflict, but rather put value on finding a way to achieve harmony. It's not that they don't know we have conflict, just as we know there's such a thing as harmony. It's just which one you tend to ritualize and play up in your life.
Well, let me jump quickly since we're tight on time on this one. When you look back, because I certainly sense that I was going to ask, how is it different in other cultures, but I certainly know there are many cultures where it's not like this. When you looked back, what did you find the sources? I mean, obviously, it seems to me it goes hand in hand with rugged individualism.
Yes, absolutely, and a tendency to think of things in dichotomies. Yes, and the glory of the individual.
Now, but I'm going to ask one other thing as you're answering this. We're perhaps the most polyglot culture, right? In other words, the most of a mix of other cultures thrown together. And this rugged individualism, how does all of that mix to produce this phenomenon?
Well, I still think that it is a product of our history. It's a Western phenomenon. You can trace it to Aristotle, who placed great emphasis on opposites, and you can trace it to our educational system, founded in the medieval university, which was very much on a warlike model. Early monks were warriors. Early teachers were clerics. And the early university, it was all male, and that's something that many people have pointed out, that it kind of focuses on the male tendency to use opposition, like little boys will fight for fun, whereas little girls won't. And our spoken rituals, men who will show their affection by playfully insulting each other or play devil's advocate to explore an idea. These are all ways that we ritualize opposition. And so I trace it back to the medieval university, and you can still see it in our educational system now.
Yeah, as you point out, the medieval university was not about a search for discovery of knowledge, but more a defense and attack debate mode about tenets, right?
Yes, people were trained to argue one side and then argue the other side. It was a kind of separation of your head and your heart, you might say, which a lot of people talk about in Western culture. It didn't matter what you felt. You had to be able to argue for either side.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that in our media today, in our
Yes.
public conversations, where people will be far more dogmatic when they talk on television than they are in their lives because they know they've only got so many minutes, and that if they're more extreme, it's going to make a better show.
One of the things I thought was, I was going to ask, do you think it's simply because, I'm talking about the media, that there's more money in conflict, and then it occurred to me, or maybe that it's just easier money in conflict?
Thank you for saying that. I think it's easier money. There's a belief that the more conflict, the more fun to watch. But I think what it actually does is hook a small audience that is really enchanted by this and drive away the larger audience that isn't. And so many people have stopped watching the news, in part because they feel there's so much shouting they really can't make out what anybody's saying.
Yeah, and I was thinking also that just the ability to present complex, blurry, gray issues, that's harder work. And so it's quicker, easier to produce conflict.
No, that's absolutely right. And after all, you've got these producers putting on shows every day. They're often very young. They're perhaps going to do it for a few years and then move on to something else.
Yeah.
There's not enough time. And so if you can just get one spokesperson from each side, and often people you know you can count on to be lively, to have an, quote, edge, you can put your show together. So I think that is a big part of it.
But as I was preparing for this, I wrote down two incidents from my own life that I'm going to share with you because I think they also illuminate this. And besides, you obviously collecting these stories is a great part of your work. One was I went to a few years ago. It was the mayoral race to succeed Tom Bradley, which ultimately Richard Riordan won. And because Bradley had been in for so long, there were 12 fairly serious candidates at one point. And Maxine Waters hosted a town meeting with all 12 of them on a panel. And fairly late in the questions from the audience, I asked from the floor if any of them felt that any of the others had something valuable to offer. What of any of the others' proposals did they find valuable?
Brilliant.
And she threw it, she sort of went, anyone want to answer? And there was a moment of silence. And then Joel Wax, who's a longtime city councilman who I think has now moved to New York to run a museum, raised his hand. And as soon as he raised it, all the others did, because you couldn't be the one who didn't, right?
Yeah.
Now, the subtle thing was that while they took turns praising the ideas of others, the most prominent candidates seemed to take care to single out the work of the more fringe candidates.
Yeah.
You got it, right?
Fascinating.
There was this one guy who clearly wasn't going to make the runoff. His stuff about parks and transportation is really wonderful. And thus,
I love it. What a brilliant idea that was to ask that. And people have pointed out, you could have as much drama getting to people with opposed views and say, you now have 10 minutes, find as many things as you can that you agree on.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty interesting to watch.
Yes, you would learn.
They just don't think of it.
You would learn about this person actually, it seems to me what it would do is it would give you a picture of what that person might be in a meeting where he's wrestling with something, which is, of course, what I think you really want to know. How is this person when he hasn't made up his mind, when a new problem comes up? And then one other one I will say is that although I usually am doing the questioning on a radio show, I co-wrote a book on an herbal supplement with a psychiatrist. And I was going to the studio to do a talk show, to be a guest. And I thought I was going to be promoting our book. And when I showed up, 5 minutes before the show, they informed me that there was going to be another guest. And that it was going to be the MD who had written the recent AMA review of about a dozen supplements. Now, I went, oh. And I remembered that I'd heard reports on PBS and on NPR that both sounded like she was quite negative. okay? Which, of course, is what the booker on the radio show had thought as well, right? But right from the top, I found her to be very fair-minded, a real scientist who didn't have an axe to
grind. Won't get
grind.
invited back.
And then I said, I don't think we have any argument, do we, Dr. O'Hara? I think we both just want to find out what works for the public. And she said, yes. And the host was flustered. I realized we're right at the end of the hour. I stole your last 2 minutes. But Deborah Tannen, I really, really thank you for this hour and for the work that you've done and for what sounds like a very fun career you've had.
Thank you. And thank you for this wonderful conversation. How lovely it would be if all the radio shows were like yours.
Oh, God. Thank you. So thank you, Deborah Tannen. Thank you, Ian Johnson, my engineer. Thank you, listeners. I look forward to being with you again. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or guests or issues you'd like to hear on the show, email me at temcnally@att.net. This is Free Forum. I'm Terry McNally. And for this conversation and many other interviews and articles to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerrenceMcNally.net, TerrenceMcNally, all one word, TerrenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and usually 10 articles that'll flesh out the conversation, email me at temcnally@mac.com, temcnally@mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast on most of those podcast sites and at my site. You can find years of podcasts at those sites and mine. Listen anytime, anywhere. Michael Lewis, Naomi Klein, Bill McKibben, Van Jones, Connie Rice, Greg Boyle, George Packer. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos of Progressive Voices, and most of all to you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely.